Welcome in the Quest Number 9 podcast. My name is Seth Warner. And today on this episode, we're going to be talking about Kentucky basketball from a fan's perspective. And on this episode, we're going to just be talking about Kentucky's busy week that we've had. Kentucky's had Pro Day. We've had Media Days. We're going to have Big Blue Madness on Saturday. And here to help us talk about that, Jacob Polachek. Jacob, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Jacob, do you want to give people just a little introduction to you who are new to you?
Yeah, so I write for KSR Plus, which is the premium site for Kentucky Sports Radio with On3 and Rivals. I'm covering all things Kentucky basketball, Kentucky football, and a lot of Kentucky basketball recruiting, especially this time of year.
With Kentucky, like I talked about just for a second, we had media days. You were there for media day and pro day. What were some of your takeaways just being there in person?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really exciting team. It was pretty cool to see Jaden Quaintance out there at Pro Day. He didn't participate in the full thing, but he was out there doing some drills. So it's good to see that his recovery is, at least according to what Mark Pope said, very ahead of schedule. So I'm expecting big things out of him this year. Jalen Lowe is that point guard one for Kentucky, and their expectations are really high for him. I don't know where he stands as a draft prospect, but as far as a college player, I think that he can really make an impact for Kentucky next season. Braden Hawthorne was one standout I had at Pro Day. I think that he's a really good long-term piece. I don't know how much he contributes from day one. He's super skinny, so he'll need to bulk up a little bit, but I see the long-term potential there as being a real contributor for Kentucky.
Were there any personalities that you're interested to see at media days, just really being able to talk to all these players for the first time?
Yeah, well, last year I didn't get the chance to talk to either of the walk-ons, so I really wanted to talk to them, especially just Walker Horn, because I think he's got a really interesting story as being the only guy on Kentucky's roster that was with Kentucky under John Calipari. So it was cool talking to him. I asked him about what that was like, that transition, and he said he found out with the rest of us that Mark Pope was going to be the hire. Like he wasn't told any inside information at the time. He was following the coaching search just like all of us. And when that Matt Norlander tweet came out that Pope was going to be the next head coach of Kentucky, he found out just like the rest of us. So I found that really interesting. And he's not the only guy on this team that's played under Mark Pope. Jackson Robinson was the only guy that played under Mark Pope last year, and he's not the only one that's been in this Kentucky program. They're bringing in a lot of returners. So it's just a lot different of a team, and it's good to talk to some of the guys that have been there throughout this whole Mark Pope tenure.
Yeah. And also, like, we're building up to Big Blue Madness, and Big Blue Madness was a big deal last year. We had some other big stuff. And Jack Pilgrim on their Source Say episode, one of your coworkers, he was talking about Jasper Johnson, kind of one of the scouts, talking about him pushing Jalen Lowe. How do you see those two kind of pushing each other in the pro day and how they worked together?
Yeah, I don't even think it's just a Jasper and Jalen Lowe thing. I think that whole backcourt is just all going to be pushing each other because Jasper looks like he's going to demand some real playing time. You've got Denzel Aberdeen, who's a national champion, who you expect to get on the floor a pretty substantial amount of time. Colin Chandler, you have just a lot of guys in that backcourt that will probably get big minutes. And luckily for how Pope plays, he spreads his minutes out a lot. I think you're going to see just a ton of different combinations in that backcourt. But Jalen Lowe is kind of that one constant where I think he's going to be on the floor more than anyone else in that backcourt.
And overall, to me, the athleticism is the biggest difference between last year's team to this year's team. How do you see some of the differences, but still some of the parallels from these two teams?
Yeah, the athleticism, like you mentioned, I know people talk about. I don't think Kentucky's going to be as good of a shooting team, but I don't think that they're going to be a bad shooting team. I think that that's kind of been blown out of proportion a little bit. I think they're still going to be able to hit some shots, but they're going to be a lot more physical. I think having Mo Diabate, that it really sets the tone for this team on the defensive end. Having Ortega back is huge, and I just think that they're going to have a different style, but it's still going to be a Mark Pope style of play, and they're going to be shooting, they're going to be scoring the ball, and I think that Last year, we talked about them having a ton of depth, and I think they have even more depth this season. The depth is just a real strength of this team. I think that last year they thought they had depth, and then they really got hit with the injury bug, and that depth wasn't looking as great. Now it's, man, if they have a few injuries, they're still going to have guys that are starting caliber players at all times. So the depth is something that really stands out to me about this team.
And also, I heard Sean Smith and Jack Pilgrim also talk about this, but the gravity last year was away from the basket just because we didn't have a lot of guys outside of Ortega that could really get downhill. And to me, this year we have a bunch of guys who can get downhill. So our quality of threes is something I'll be interested to see that adjustment.
Yeah, and I think like Lowe can definitely get downhill. Ortega, like we talked about, a lot of these guys can get downhill, and then you have the front court where all eyes are on Jaden Quaintance. I think that he's going to play significant amount of time. I think that he should have a speedy recovery to getting back on the floor, but so much of this team just comes down to how healthy is Jaden Quaintance and how big of an impact is he making. Because if he's the Jaden Quaintance that we all know, then it's going to be a really scary team. And I think that makes the difference between them being what they were last year and them being a national title contender.
And for the people that don't know, you host a podcast, Here Comes the Boom, and you're big into recruiting. So let's get into some of that. And one of the big recruiting targets for Kentucky's Tyron Stokes. He's getting into the last stretch of his recruitment. Where are your sources, or how are you looking at him right now?
Yeah, I think that he is the clear number one target for Kentucky in the 2026 class. I think there's no question about that. And I think that it's an interesting position they're in where they can't really make too much of a push on other players until they know what happens with Tyron Stokes. I wouldn't trade Kentucky's position for anybody else in that recruitment. You have Oregon involved, Kansas, USC, Louisville. So there are a lot of schools involved there, but Kentucky has been the school talked about the most in the recent months, and all talking to all of my sources, they're coming up in every conversation. So Kentucky, I feel good about where they're positioned in that spot or in that recruitment. I think that now is just a matter of seeing what the time frame looks like, because if this drags out, then other schools could potentially make a move. But if it happens soon, then I would expect Kentucky to be the choice. We just have to see when he sets a commitment date. There's rumors about when he'll decide, but I haven't heard anything concrete yet. I think we're just kind of in wait and see mode when it comes to Tyron Stokes. And when he makes a decision, I think you'll start to see a real domino effect of other players in the class making their college decisions.
Also, another big recruit that Kentucky's looking at, another top 10 player. We know Tyron Stokes right now is kind of the consensus number one guy, but Caleb Holt, another big Kentucky target, he's going on an unofficial visit to Big Blue Madness Saturday. What are your thoughts on how he looks going into this unofficial visit for Kentucky?
Yeah, I think that he's a very high priority for Kentucky, but I'm not sure their chances of landing him if Tyron Stokes commits. I just think that you're putting a lot of your NIL resources into Tyron Stokes. Caleb Holt is, depending on what service you look at, a number 4 player in the country, number 5 player in the country. He's right there in that top 5, and he and if Kentucky lands Tyron Stokes, you're going against Alabama, Houston, a lot of these other schools that are Arizona, and these schools that are have Caleb Holt as number 1 on their board. So if he's your number 2 target after Tyron Stokes, it's going to be hard to compete with those schools. So I think a lot of his recruitment and how hard Kentucky pursues will depend on where Tyron Stokes goes and when he makes his decision. He already took an official visit earlier this fall, and he'll be back for Big Blue Madness. The Kentucky staff is working hard in that recruitment.
And Deron Rippey's another big Kentucky target. He just wrapped up his official visit. How do you see his recruitment coming out of that official visit?
Yeah, I talked to his dad right after the official visit, and he just had very high praise for that Kentucky team, for that Kentucky program, the facilities, just everything. Rippey's plays at Blair Academy, same high school as Otego Away, so they got the chance to spend some time together on that visit. NC State is a school that is pushing hard for Rippey. NC State's general manager, Andrew Slater, visited with him on Wednesday following his Kentucky visit. Other schools I've heard are Tennessee. That's one that's coming up a lot, and then Duke. So There are a lot of schools involved. He's taken visits to Miami, North Carolina, Texas, Syracuse, got visits to Duke, Tennessee, and NC State. So there's just a lot of schools involved in this one. Kentucky is clearly making him their number one point guard target in the class, but I still think they have some ground to make up if they want to land this commitment.
And also with DeAndre Rippey, something I'm interested in is how do you, just talking to his dad and talking to people around the Kentucky program, how are they pitching his fit? Because would they pitch him as a 2-year guy, or how do you see those talks going?
Yeah, it's all about opportunity. And his dad said that they would give him the opportunity to have the ball in his hands he said, with quote, the great 2026 class of recruiting and the returning players. So they'll be paying close attention to who returns and the kind of role and opportunity, something that gets brought up in all of my conversations with Rippey's father. And they're looking closely at opportunity. So it'll be interesting to see who stays from Kentucky, who leaves, and how much opportunity there is for a 2026 point guard.
And in this class, with the transfer portal being very important and some of these guys waiting later and later to commit, uh, not as much compared to usual, where it's usually earlier on. How do you see Kentucky building out this class, and how many guys do you think they'll end up signing?
I think that, like I said, a lot of it just depends on what happens with Tyron Stokes. I think that if Stokes commits, that's going to be a lot of your NIL funding towards one player, and we'll see how many guys they take in the class after that. I do think that things are going to move fast. I'd maybe expect them to take 3 or 4 guys, but if they only took 2 or 3, it wouldn't surprise me. 5 seems like a lot, especially with how many guys they have slated to come back next year. But I wouldn't count out any number of players that they take in this class just because they're in on so many guys, and it's we'll have to see how things unfold player by player, because I think that we'll get a lot more clarity after Tyron Stokes makes his college decision, whether it's to Kentucky or elsewhere.
All right. Thank you, Jacob. Do you want to tell everybody where they can find your work?
Yeah, you can find my work at ksrplus.com, or you can follow me on social media at PolachekKSR. We'll be posting a lot of great content on all this recruiting news and Kentucky basketball news now that the season is almost underway.
All right, it was good to have Jacob on, but now we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that we got from media days after we got his perspective on some of the recruiting stuff. We're going to dive more into just some of what Pro Day looked like and just some of the media days after getting his perspective. Coach Pope talked for about 40 minutes in his interview. Like I said, Jacob was there, and him and all the KSR staff was there pretty much. Coach Pope got asked a question. I thought it was very interesting, talking about all the different players and just giving like one word. He gave one word for Jalen Lowe. He said he's twitchy, fast, and some of the other players, but you could definitely tell Coach Pope loves him some Mo Diabate, and showing off some of that. He just embodies some of that physicality, speed, strength, athleticism. It's just one of the top athletes on the team, a guy that just plays bigger than he is. And Jacob talked about Jaden Quainton's looking really good. Like he said, he did a lot of the non-contact stuff, dunked a couple times, movement really well. Like he said, it's hope for a speedy recovery. Coach Pope kept on talking about that he's breaking records and records. One of those was that his leg strength has grown so much that his legs are even stronger than most NBA players at this point in his recovery. It's just that mobility, that speed, that change of direction. It's just going to have to keep on getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And like we talked about in the past, that recovery time usually, hopefully, he's in that non-contact stage. And as he continues to develop over the next couple of weeks, hopefully he gets into full contact. And once he gets into full contact, he's a couple weeks maybe away from being able to play, because usually when you're doing non-contact, that's your conditioning, all the just the real stuff. The couple weeks are just getting you used to physicality and what to really expect going into the season. And We got to hear a little bit of Modi Abate talking about his motivational speaking and different things. Jalen Lowe talked about him just being a true point guard and what that means, and how today there's not as many true point guards, but his goal is to embody that and just be a guy that facilitates and makes plays, not just for himself, but for others. Popovich talked about kind of his struggles too early on in the fall practices and workouts, and it was very interesting to hear his perspective. And Yelovich kind of told us that through some of the UK process, and just him and Big Z are from the same country, so they became friends. And we figured out why Big Z got sick after about 2 years, but he told us that he told him that it was Papa John's pizza. He had way too much of it, and that gave him food poisoning or gave him a really bad stomach ache. So Yelovich talked about over the last week or two, he's really been starting to get more comfortable and just being able to thrive in his environment, being more familiar. And Coach Pope even talked about he missed a good 8 weeks of just understanding the feel, understanding how to read in this offense and how to just make plays and be able to just make really good decisions and be under control at all times. And he'd been really starting to shoot. He shot the ball really well, but the physicality sometimes it's a different level, different kind of physicality he talked about compared to his overseas guys, where everybody here is a prospect, where over there's a lot of older guys that are just trying to get paid, and here everybody's just competing as a prospect, a college level prospect that's trying to make it to the pro level. Coach Pope talked about their defensive identity and how this team is going to defend, and their goal is to be a top 5 defensive team in the country, and how Otega Owe has embraced some of that, trying to work. Otega talked about it too, working on his conditioning so he can be an elite level two-way player is one thing that he got from his NBA process, and just really being able to recover. He's had turf toe, but he said he should be full go back on the court this week with the team. So we'll be able to really, over the next week or two, he should be ready for the Purdue game and really be able to ramp up as this team waits for Jaden Quaintance. That shouldn't be too much behind Otega in his recovery process. But overall, Kentucky is starting to get to the beginning of the season and really being able to amplify. And Big Blue Madness is really the start of the season, the official tip-off, and that is on Saturday. So we'll really be able to see what this Kentucky team is made of. And that's all from the Quest for Number 9 podcast. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. And like Jacob said, go check out his social medias and KSR for more content that he produces. But if you enjoy this, like and subscribe. And you can go check me out at Quest for Mine on Instagram and Twitter, AKX, and I will see you next time.